Okay, so I'm gonna introduce the next session, which is Inside Industry, Real-World Career Journeys. This will offer insights from the seasoned professionals who have successfully built their careers across diverse roles in the biomanufacturing and life sciences ecosystem. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Darius Rakas. He's the BioHub Next Scientific Co-Director, as well as the panelists to the front of the room. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and great to see so many people here. So I'm Darius Rakas, assistant professor at TMU, and we're joined by a whole panel of fantastic professionals who have carved out different pathways in biomanufacturing, life sciences, and the pharma industry. And I'm going to introduce them in order from right to left. So all the way on the end in green, we have Lisa Wise Milestone, who is an Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships at Moderna and executes on Moderna's strategy for pandemic preparedness and domestic biomanufacturing here in Canada. And I'm going to keep the biographies brief because we want to hear directly from our panelists more about their career journeys. Next to her is David Seeley, who is a Director of Regulatory Affairs at AstraZeneca Canada. And he has over 14 years of experience in regulatory and medical affairs, working at a number of pharma companies previously. Next to him is Helen Sarantis. Helen is Associate Director of Analytical and Quality Control at Blue Rock Therapeutics, a Canadian success story here from Toronto. She has over 10 years experience in quality control, quality assurance, R&D, supporting method and process validation, method transfers, and analytical lifecycle management. Next to her, we have Neil Blackburn, Senior Director of Process and Analytical Development at Omnia Bio. Prior to that, he's worked at various roles related to research and process development at companies like Eli Lilly, Siemens, Healthineers, and Sanofi. And seated next to me is Jonathan Labriola, Director of Operations at Synakis, which is an early-stage startup company developing biomaterials to treat ocular disease. And he's currently a research associate in Professor Molly Schoikit's lab at U of T. So welcome our panel. Thank you. Wonderful. So I wanted to talk with each of you about your career paths and career journeys. So one common thing of all of you is you all did your PhDs in something related to life sciences, biomedical physics, molecular biology, but you've all gone on very different career paths. And our panelists, our audience here are in similar positions to where you were as you were finishing your studies. So I wanted to go through if you could tell us a little bit about your career path. So maybe Neil, we could start with you. First, could you just tell us in the very briefest terms what you do now? What is process development and how did you get there?
Sure. So process and analytical development, maybe I'll take a step back. The company I work for is called Omnia Bio, which is a CDMO, which is a company that services small companies and larger companies to bring their products, which in this case are focused on cell and gene therapies, through clinical development and into late-stage registration and commercial. So one of the first things that's needed to be able to supply clinical demand and then eventually commercial operations is a solid process and a set of analytics that support that process. So my team's involved with the development of that, of both of those things, as well as also in charge of manufacturing science and technology, which is a group that takes what has been developed and translates it into a GMP clean room.
And how did you get into that position? Tell me, how did you go from PhD to...
Yeah, so like I suspect many of you in the room, as I began to finish my PhD, I wondered if industrial science was for me, which I think is a hard question to answer when you have, as as I did and as all of you are, in academia with probably a fairly limited view of what goes on in industry. What is D? I'm pretty sure I knew what R was, but I had no idea, as it turns out, what development was. And so one of the first steps I took as I started to finish my PhD was to understand how I can test the waters of industry without committing. Meaning to say, if I really didn't like it, and as I kind of reflect on the years I've been in industry, I've come to realize industrial science is not for everybody. So one of the first levers I pulled was to actually test the waters to see whether I like it through an industrial postdoc. So I did a postdoc in the discovery team at Eli Lilly in the US after I finished my PhD at the University of Guelph. And that was an important milestone for me, I think, in helping to decide, yes, I do want to stay in industry, I like it, it's interesting. And then from then on, I've kind of built, I'm lucky to have the opportunity to come back to Canada to work in the area that was very close to my PhD studies at Sanofi. And so I've kind of built on that. But the first step, I think, for me was that, is it right for me? And I think that's a question that is hard to answer, but you have to kind of come to terms with.
Great, thank you. Helen, how did you get, you went from your PhD, and I understand you did a postdoc, but you also ended up in industry. How did you get there?
Okay, I'm not as well-spoken, I think, as Neil. But yeah, so I decided to do a academic postdoc, actually, because I loved working in the lab. And so I wanted to have like that last opportunity to do like that true kind of academic research. And then my plan was actually to do an industrial postdoc after that. But what ended up happening was I happened to find a job in industry. Like I didn't have to do the industrial postdoc. I think what helped me get that job in industry was at the time, after I finished my postdoc, it was because I had my second kid. So I decided to take 2 years off. And during the second year, I started thinking about, well, how am I going to get like my first full-time job? So at the time, I was actually looking for postdocs, but then I was just networking kind of like in this kind of situation with people that I knew. And I had a friend who was working for a startup. It was like a little startup out of U of T. And they needed people, it wasn't a full-time thing, but they needed people to do like 10 hours here, 10 hours there to help them get their documentation together it was a CLIA certification. So I think that really helped me because I learned about sort of getting methods ready for like that kind of licensing, if that makes any sense. And then after that, I think that helped me with my interview at Sanofi because that was a QC position and they needed someone that knew about validation, method validation. So I kind of say to people, it's a sort of a niche topic where, there's very specific things you look at depending on types of test methods. And so from what I had learned in that startup, like at a part-time thing that I was doing from home while I was on mat leave, that really helped me. I think I did well in the interview because I could speak to some of the topics. And then obviously like my background, everything I'd learned through my postdoc and my PhD also helped me from a technical perspective. Yeah.
And compiling documentation for CLIA certification, right? That is very different from what people do in their PhD, right? So, were there any nerves or apprehensions, or did you have to take some time to convince yourself that this was something you could do, or like how did you dive into it?
I think doing a PhD and then a postdoc, you have to learn all the time. I think a lot of you guys you're the first person to bring in like a new kind of program into your academic lab. Like that was me. I brought in like a whole neutrophil project into our lab. So I think I was used to learning, like reading papers and like using that to like make an assay in my PhD lab, for example. So I think that gave me a lot of confidence. And it was just a matter of being like, what is like the right guideline that I can look at that will help me figure out how to do the project. So I wasn't coming out of nowhere. I think for CLIA certification, there's going to be like certain things that you're going to look at that you have to do. And so I knew that from the people I was working with, and then the rest of it was just like figure it out. Yeah.
Okay. I want to move to David. So Helen and Neil are both, I think you guys would identify yourselves still as scientists when we talked before. David, you're maybe one of our first panelists who I think you said to me, you're no longer a scientist, but I disagree on the labeling. But you work in regulatory affairs, which is not at the bench. Could you tell us what's actually the role of regulatory affairs in a company like AstraZeneca? Because I think a lot of our trainees have not considered, like, what does it actually mean to go from academia to work in a regulated industry?
So my role, Director, Regulatory Affairs, Oncology at AstraZeneca. So I lead a team of people to bring our products through the Health Canada review process. So focused on Canada. You think about all of the R&D that goes into product development. Once that's ready for moving towards commercialization, Health Canada has an important role in reviewing the chemistry manufacturing, non-clinical, clin pharm, clinical safety information, product labeling. So our team compiles all that information, meets with Health Canada to give them a briefing, submits, and then stewards the responses to Health Canada's many questions, eventually coming up with an approval, hopefully, that a treatment that patients can use in the cancer space to live hopefully longer and healthier lives. So I'm not a bench scientist today, but I'm a scientist at heart, and I use those scientific skill sets in every part of my day job.
And how did you get onto that career path after your PhD?
The key for me, and I'll thank Logan earlier in the panel who talked about portfolio building. So in my case, I had done my PhD in medical biophysics with a focus on cancer biology, which is relevant to what I'm doing now, but the path to get there was a little more circuitous. So building that portfolio, in my case, involved medical writing. So when I graduated from my PhD, I had the knowledge base. I could write well. I was editing papers in the lab, in other labs. But then how do I develop that portfolio that's relevant for pharma? One of my peers who graduated ahead of me was a medical writer, so she hooked me up with some opportunities. And over the course of a couple of years, I had done projects for 4 companies that then helped me build a portfolio that when I applied for a position in a company, the first position I held was medical information associate at J&J. And what they were looking for was someone who could write, someone who knows pharma, and hopefully someone who has potential. And so that was my foot in the door. Worked in the oncology and immunology space. Their agility was important because I didn't know the product coming in, had really zero knowledge about immunology, but business priorities change and you get moved around. And that was my audition. I didn't know it at the time, but the senior leader that I was working for also was leading regulatory, and when a position opened up in our group, she said, "David, I think you should apply for this." Never really thought about regulatory as a career path, but I thought, well, I know medical information at this point. Let me try something new, learn it, and I've been in the regulatory space for 14 years, so I found that it's been a useful endeavor that I have the skill set for, and now I'm training other people how to develop in their regulatory path.
Great, thank you. Lisa, strategic partnerships. That sounds very different from R&D. What's your role at Moderna, and how did you get on that path?
Yeah, so I definitely do not consider myself a scientist or an engineer anymore, unfortunately. Again, that is my background, but my role right now at Moderna, so I've been there just over 3 years, and I lead a major strategic partnership with the federal government. So I really call myself kind of the jack of all trades because I do like government affairs, I do some communications, a very close relationship with our manufacturing facility in Quebec, so there's a lot of project management related to that as well. And I think having that kind of approach that like the jack of all trades kind of thing, I think helped me get into this role because I was willing to wear lots of different hats. And so even though, Moderna is more well-known now, you might think of it as a big pharma, we kind of grew up in the public's eye during the pandemic, so we're kind of more of a biotech. So I was employee number 17, I think, at Moderna Canada, so I really did have to wear a lot of different hats, and that willingness to just dive in and try whatever they, do whatever was needed to get ourselves established in the country. So how did I get there? So I did my undergrad at University of Guelph in bioengineering. It was a co-op program, which was amazing, because then one of my co-op placements was at a research lab at Mount Sinai Hospital. So that led me to want to do grad school. So I did my PhD at University of Toronto in osteoporosis research. And so that was in material science and engineering. Again, very different. My path has not been linear whatsoever. So after that, I did a postdoc at Sunnybrook in more bone cancer research. Quickly realized that research wasn't for me. I didn't think I would go down that road long term. So I was fortunate to get a job at KPMG doing technical consulting for scientific research and experimental development tax credits, so SR&ED tax credits. A lot of the big four accounting firms actually do hire scientists and engineers to validate the R&D work, and we work with the accountants. Luckily, during grad school, I had done some part-time technical writing for a boutique consulting firm. So I was able to, I think that helped me obviously get the job at KPMG because I had done that technical writing. So I was at KPMG for 3 years or so. And then because I have an engineering background, a lot of my projects that I worked on were very engineering focused on the automotive industry, and my heart is in life sciences, so I very quickly wanted to look for an opportunity to bring me back closer to my interests. So I made the leap to a group called Facet. Some of you may have heard of them, commercialization partner for Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. And in that role, I was kind of the project manager and kind of a liaison between industry and academia. So that, I think I had the academic background, I had the industry background kind of from KPMG. And so that role, again, I wore lots of different hats in that role. We were a small team, we had pitch competitions, we had an investment fund. So I really had a chance to really develop my business acumen at that role. And then finally, a few years later, I think working at Facet, as I said, we had an investment fund. We were working with startups, like giving money to startups, helping to help academics develop commercialization skills. I wanted to be on the other side of it, and so this role at Moderna came up, and I jumped at the opportunity. One thing I have to say, I've been very fortunate, and I think this is not typical, because obviously networking events like this are amazing, but I do have to just give a shout out and say, you never know. Like, I actually, for every one of those key jobs I've had, it was a cold call. Like, I just applied to the position. So I think, I don't know, maybe it's the way you sell yourself in your resume and your cover letter, and like really trying to customize it for that role. But I have got every single one of my job not through networking. So that's probably not a good thing to say at this room, but it's my truth. So.
But it's an excellent plug for our workshop this afternoon on storytelling and building your own narrative. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. Jonathan, you're very different from everyone else on the panel in that everyone else has worked for a company most people have heard of, but you're blazing your own trail as an entrepreneur. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you've gone from your PhD to your current role and what you're doing at Synakis today as well.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So, like many of my panelists and people in this room, I'm a PhD. I got that from McGill University in biochemistry, and that focus was really on proteins. I was all protein characterization, structure-function relationships, that sort of thing. And at a certain point, I got really interested in what proteins can do as therapeutics. So there's actually a company based here, they might still be around, Northern Biologics, who I ran into at a conference, and I thought, I want to talk to them once my PhD is done. That didn't work out, but I found the lab that company was spun out of, which was Dev Sidhu's lab, was at U of T at the time, and so I applied there for a postdoc. And what was great about that experience is Dev had come from industry. He worked at Genentech for a while, started his lab at U of T. So all the projects were very industry focused. It was protein engineering, antibody development against targets that were industry validated. And so the position was very much a scientist one. I was a postdoc, but we were working towards developing antibodies that could be translated. And so I started to gain the understanding of what it takes to make that, how that development process works, and what it needs to look like ultimately if you base a startup on it or if you want to license it to a pharmaceutical firm. And so that was a fantastic experience. And from there, I was connected with Molly, not proteins at all. So she took a bit of a risk on me, but it was biomaterials for ocular applications, treating ocular disease. And at the time, Synecus was just a little startup incubating in her lab, and she said, you know, come work with me and work on these projects, and we'll get Synecus going. So that was, again, doing a lot of science, but also meeting with, I think consultants helped a lot, you know, meeting with consultants, having them explain to us what regulatory is required, what kind of documents you need, consultants who helped us with securing financing, so putting together budgets, all these sorts of things that was kind of learned on the job that way. And so, you know, where I'm at now is Synecus is getting ready to emerge, and I still have a bit of a toe in academia, but I'm getting ready to fully move out. And for operations, what it really is on a day-to-day basis is you need to have a firm understanding of the science and what the product is and what it can do. And then communicating that to all other interested parties, again, whether that's investors or regulators, and making them understand what it is and what needs to be done to get it to that next phase, which is clinical development. And then, you know, doing operations, for my part, it's getting all the resources we need in place to make that happen, the infrastructure, all of our materials and reagents, and organizing that, making sure it's in place, and making sure we can meet the milestones.
Excellent. I see that there are already some questions coming in on Slido, and I think we will go with the most important one right now. So for our panel, there seems to be this question around PhD versus MSc in industry. Now, all of you have your PhDs, but you work with all sorts of people. What's the value proposition for either of those? I don't know who would like to go first. Neil?
You know, I think there are roles for people at both of those levels of education, and it's about your entry role. That is to say, you know, there are roles that are designed around the requirements that having this extended education of having a PhD under your belt will open up certain roles for you. On the other hand, there are roles that as you jump into the role, have an expectation for an MSc. But you'll quite often see, you know, roles that are both. So at our company, we will consider, you know, PhDs with a certain kind of expertise, or MScs or BScs with different levels of experience. I say that because that's sort of the most important, I think in my mind, the most important distinction between that is when you jump into a role. What you do with the role, regardless of your education, how you progress within the company, you have a lot of control over that. So if you're entering a role that around you is led by or is filled by PhDs, but you're adding the value and working towards, you know, being able to succeed in that role, companies often will you know, they don't look as stringently as you might think of education once you've built up that expertise. So it doesn't. What I'm trying to say is it doesn't create barriers to have an MSc and make that jump there. But you know, the entry into, I think, is probably the delineator sometimes.
Maybe I can add to that. So I'm biased because I have a PhD, but thinking about when you do any type of laboratory research, let's say biomedical research, you're developing ideas, hypotheses, you're designing, running experiments, collecting data, analyzing data, communicating your results. And if you do that over a period of time, you're training to be a scientist, right? Some people choose that path, others don't. And so then the question is, well, what is the value of that training in the industry setting? So me as a scientist, I can talk to all the other scientists, all the other SMEs in different functions. So that, I would say, is a benefit. But everyone's path is unique, right? So in my case, I was 7 years from the start of graduate school to getting a PhD. Sounds like an unbelievably long time, but I did it, and I was a much better, say, scientific thinker and executor in year 7 than I was at year 2, right? But for your own journey, maybe you decide that, okay, I have what I need in year 2 to then progress to the master's and then do something else. At the end of the day, it's not so much what you have on paper and the credential, but it's what do you bring, what have you learned, and how are you translating that into the role that you're in. I have a super smart guy on my team, Masters, who's probably smarter than all the PhDs on my team. And some people without a PhD, long time in the industry, they're equally as capable and have potential. So it really comes down to the individual and what you think you need in terms of your training to then take that forward into what you want to do next.
Okay, excellent. Related to that, there was a question on the board about, I think the second one there, about a few PhD level openings in biotech industry, which may cause some people who are working on their PhDs or about to finish with their PhDs concern and maybe the origin of the PhD versus master's question. But this question focuses more on if there are so few PhD level openings, what are things that that you've seen or maybe from your own experiences that have helped you make sure that the hiring team has actually seen your resume or actually reached out to you? Lisa, you said everything was cold calls and luck, but do you have any insight on some of the things that you've done that have helped you be successful, get the opportunities you've had?
Yeah, I guess what I might say is, don't be afraid to apply for jobs that, PhD is not on the list of, I think you'll find that's common, like where it's not one of the, requirements. Don't feel like you're applying beneath you, because you just have to get that foot in the door. And then once you're there, you can see with someone with your skill set, where could you potentially move? So, I think my PhD has probably helped, it has helped open the doors, but do I think I could have got to where I am today without it? I have to say maybe yes, because again, I work more on the business side and the commercial team. I think there's only maybe 2 of us with PhDs, and it's just because we kind of did that non-linear path. So I think, without having those internal referrals, I think probably for me, something I did during my PhD probably helped me get the second job I mentioned, which was at Facet. So during my PhD, I volunteered with UHN's tech transfer office. And so I worked on a kind of a case project with them. And that work was directly related to the work that I did at Facet. And so I think it wasn't my PhD that brought my resume to the top of that. It was because I had relevant experience. So I think, trying to get a breadth of wide-ranging experience, I think sometimes can be more valuable than a PhD. I don't know if this is a bad thing to say in the room, but as I said, I am very much, I feel, a jack of all trades, so I have a breadth of experience as opposed to maybe a depth, and that's what PhDs are all about, is having a depth expertise. So I think just embrace that other side and try to work on the breadth of experience.
One thing I've heard from all of our panelists has been like different experiences. The career paths have not been very linear necessarily. Like some have worked for the same company for a number of years, and others have. Some of you have jumped from company to company. How do you make these decisions to change roles, right? Because also within a company, you might move from, David, you were talking about medical information now to regulatory, but how have each of you made these decisions when to switch role or even when to switch organization? Helen, you've got your hand up. So.
As someone who's changed roles a lot, so every job I've ever gotten has been through somebody reaching out to me, so it's actually the complete opposite of you, and I think that depends on the person and their journey. I've always been open because I feel like taking a new job is like a way to get paid and learn at the same time. It gives you like experience, and then it opens up opportunities for the future. Like if I've had somebody that I trust, that I've worked well with in the past, and it sounds like an interesting opportunity, it's good for them, it's good for me. I have done that in the past, like now multiple times. So yeah, like it's just not being afraid. It also depends though on like your personal situation, right? Because like sometimes you can't take risks, but sometimes you know maybe it's more stable at home or whatever, and so you're able to do that. Yeah.
Neil or David, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just reflect and maybe extend what Helen is saying about, each role as an opportunity to learn. You have to also sort of inwardly look and see when roles are no longer teaching you and no longer challenging you and you're not moving in your career. Those points of reflection are really important for you to be able to say, oh, I want to stick it out in this role and maybe, get a stretch assignment and push myself, or that's not possible in this role, and a different role in the same company or a different role in a different company is the next step. So it's a lot about self-reflection about where you think your career is going and are you happy with that progress. If you are, that's great. If you're not, then those kind of conversations with myself have often led to a change between companies.
David, you want to add something, David?
So I would echo what you said just now around learning opportunities, but I wanted to flip it a little bit, and that one trend that I'm seeing a little is that people move on too soon. So people that have worked in my team, they're searching for that next and that next thing. Well, you haven't really mastered what you're currently doing, so if you want to come back, you're not going to be coming back at a higher level necessarily. You're going to have to come back and learn some of these fundamental pieces. So I think that upon all of us encourages us to think about, well, what more can I learn in this particular role that I'm in before I'm ready for that next step? Otherwise, you're not really getting the mileage out of your role that you have the opportunity to get today that might be holding you back for that future role down the line.
Excellent. I want to extend this learning on the job and learning through the different opportunities you've had and put it actually to you, Jonathan. So you're closest to our trainees in terms of you've been in an academic lab most recently. What are the opportunities you have and how do you see, what skills do you see yourself developing differently from just being a postdoc working in entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I was in a meeting with Molly the other week, and one of the things she said was, what's wonderful about a startup is you get to learn everything, but what's very annoying about a startup is you get to learn everything. So I think when it depends on the role. Sunaikis is very early stage. There are very few of us. We're learning everything from finance to the regulatory, and it's all very valuable. I don't think you could put one above the other. To come from the perspective of a scientist transitioning there, I think the two that are the most important that I want to talk about is one, learning to work in a GMP environment. I found it to be very, very different than an academic lab and the requirements there for obtaining your dissertation, and just how you document things, how you do things, how you implement changes to your experiments, your processes, as they're called, is a bit of a transition. So that's a great learning experience, and there's so much opportunities for that. BioHubNet is a great one, and there's a talk earlier today that mentioned a program at McGill, which I think is amazing. That's really helpful. And then the other one, just having to speak to so many different people. Again, when you're early stage, you're talking to different people with different backgrounds, and so learning to communicate effectively is very, very important. These technologies are very complicated. We understand that as PhDs, and you'll have to talk about that again to investors, regulators, all these different people, sometimes the same time in one day, and I think it's really critical to understand who you're talking to, exactly what they need to know, and then find a way to communicate that very clearly and concisely so that they can understand what you need from them, and things don't get lost in the details, because that can happen very easily, when you're a scientist developing these things from academic lab.
Chance to learn everything and have to learn everything. That sounds overwhelming to me. We're gonna end shortly, but a lot of the questions on there about opportunities, finding opportunities, how do you get your first opportunity? One of the things that BioHubNet does that I'm going to plug here is that we provide that foot in the door through internships, and so many of our trainees here might actually end up doing a BioHubNet internship. I'm just wondering from the panel, as we've been talking about learning opportunities, when someone is doing a new role for the first time and thinking back to when you first transitioned to industry, what are some things that they can do to maximize their experience, either in this internship or in any first entry-level role?
I think whether it's an internship or a postdoc or however you come to try and gain this, or you have this experience to learn, I think one thing, it might be a base level of comfort to say, I'm going to be a scientist and working in an industrial lab doing science. But I think you'll get the most benefit from that, from obviously doing that, if that's your domain of expertise and that's what you're growing, but also be a bit demanding on your manager to say, can you also invite me to this business meeting? I want to learn a little bit about IP. I want to learn a little bit about finance and how all of that gels together with the science that I'm doing. I want to learn a little bit about GMP while I'm doing this development. So make sure you grasp you get the full value out of those early experiences. Again, as I was saying a little while ago, to really see whether or not this is for you, right? Because it's really not for everyone. So take full advantage of not just a narrow piece of the pie, but try to embed yourself and ask for your manager's help in embedding you across all the things that go on in industry.
I would say yes, and make yourself visible. So if you sit in the room in the meeting and say nothing, nobody knows who you are, nobody knows what you can do. But if you're asking questions, presenting your work, ask for those opportunities to present your work, then when it comes time for a hiring, if there's an opening, then people will know you, they'll be able to speak about what you've contributed.
I have maybe something controversial to say, which is one difference between academia and when you work for a company is that it's no longer your thing. It's like, it's not your publication, and like, so you really have to, if you're coming into a company, it's like now you're a part of the team, and everything you're working on is like, we're all working on it together. I sometimes see that with folks coming in from academia where it's like a hoarding of stuff, because I think that's what you do when you're in academia. Yeah, don't do that when you get into industry. That would not really help. Yeah.
And the only thing I would add too is, like if you are fortunate to get that internship, because I know it's very hard, like once you're there, like just be willing to roll up your sleeves. Like again, I said I was one of the early people starting at Moderna. We all take turns like unloading the dishwasher and ordering snacks. And you just do it because it's a small group. And so definitely have that mentality that nothing's too small for you to work on. Like it shows that you're willing to put up your hand and contribute to the team, and that gets noticed, as opposed to someone who's trying to stay in their lane and just do their 9 to 5. Like you kind of do have to show that you're a team player. So
the one thing I would echo is what you said, Helen. I think that's very true. With feeling that moving a technology from an academic lab into the clinic, unfortunately the inventor of the material has since left the lab, so he's not part of the company, but when you're developing that, it's your idea, you're in the world of ideas, and those matter to you, they're yours. But when you want to translate it, there are other interested parties and other things that need to be taken into consideration if you're going to inject this in people. So understanding that and willing to give up certain aspects of whatever it is about the technology to meet that goal, I think is important.
Excellent. I've been getting the time warning, so I think we're going to end our panel here. So let's thank our panelists one more time. And our panelists will be around at least at lunchtime today, so if you'd like to connect with them, find some more, ask more questions, particularly these questions about how do you get started in these different industries and what opportunities there are, they will be available. But that ends this panel session, so thank you.